Chapter 11. The drop into Bunda's atmosphere wasn't easy, but the small shuttle's design had been loosely based on the US CMC UD-4 series. Not close enough to allow for manoeuvrability or comfort, but Lara was willing to settle for what it did offer: the capacity to drop into a planet's atmosphere without burning to a crisp. Thanks to an auto program loaded up by one of the pilots on Bunda, the shuttle broke through only moments from the survey station and flew itself to the designated coordinates, giving the 3 passengers an opportunity to see the world that had found them. HK Max teams usually stayed out in the field for months at a time, with occasional R&R stops at satellite stations. But even without weeks upon weeks of sterility to compare it to, Lara thought that she'd never seen such a beautiful place. Bunda was fantastically, wildly alive, the pale lemony sky strewn with flocks of indigenous birds, the surface thick with plants in multiple shades of green. Ellis pointed out some movement through one of the clearings they passed over, and they saw a group of brown-furred humanoid creatures loping through the heavy grasses, tailed, each no more than a metre high. Like primates, if Lara remembered her history, test monkeys. Seeing them running free through the warm living jungle was amazing, an antidote to the slaughterhouse that had been DS-949. The 3 of them sat in the warming cockpit, Ellis and Jess half sitting on the co-pilot seat together. Lara was the only one with any flying experience, although hers was almost exclusively 0G. It struck her again how incredibly lucky they were, saved, with only a few hours of air left, by people who had the technology to see them safely to this paradise. If only it wasn't company. "There it is," said Jess, pointing roughly northeast from their moving position. Almost as he said it, the shuttle veered towards the station, giving them a clear view of where they were going. It wasn't as beautiful as Bunda, but it was close. It was a design that Lara had heard about but never seen, an M.E. Hess multi-envelope, named after the architect who drafted the first on Earth. The M.E.s were relatively inexpensive, durable, and because their contact with the ground was limited to a small number of relatively slender stabilizing posts and a single industrial lift, there was little danger of unexpected interaction with a planet's natural inhabitants, an important consideration in unexplored environments. "It looks like a bunch of balloons with a couple of ledges tacked on," Jess said, and Lara smiled, nodding. In essence, that was exactly what they were looking at. The gigantic off-white spheres were filled with buoyant gases, supporting a series of decks for landing and observation, laboratories, and a decently sized living area. The uninflated balloons were much cheaper to transport than powdered plasticrete. And Lord knows, the company's always looking at the bottom line. A rather tense male voice spoke clearly through the comm, startling her a little. She wasn't used to being addressed by her title anymore. "Lieutenant Kara, this is Kevin Vincent, ASM for Bunda Survey. Do you read?" "Acting or active station manager." Lara took a deep breath and tapped the return, aware that Jess and Ellis were both watching her nervously. She'd been second in command for the HK team, only Pop outranking her. For a while at least, she'd be speaking for all of them. "Affirmative, Mr. Vincent. This is Second Lieutenant Catherine Lara, from WY49392, Nemesis. Also present are Martin Jess and Brian Ellis from Nemesis. On behalf of all of us, I'd like to..." She'd wanted to thank him first thing, boost their chances for a warm reception, but Vincent cut her off. "You'll be landing on Deck 7, ETA 4 minutes. Please remain aboard until we've had a chance to verify your status. We'll let you know when you've been cleared." Lara frowned, her gut sinking. "Mr. Vincent, I can assure you that..." "Over and out," he said. The comm went dead. Ellis looked pale. "What does that mean?" he asked. Do we have to wait until they call one of the home offices? Find out who we are?" "It means they already have," Jess said, his voice tight with anger. He glared out at the glowing station, his upper lip curled. "They don't want us wandering around, telling people what really happened. Probably gonna feed us some bullshit line about quarantine." "But it's standard protocol, isn't it?" Ellis asked. "Us coming from an infected area?" Jess laughed, a humorless bark. Yeah, right. We don't have sleep capacity. They'd know that. For Christ's sake, if one of us was dorked and caught, we'd all be wiped by now. They fell into an uneasy silence as the shuttle lowered itself over LZ-7, the station giant now that they were so close. Lara keeping her hands on the controls in case the program glitched. Jess was right. Bunda wasn't worried about infection, which could only mean that someone, Gregson maybe, had sent word. They were the sole survivors from an infested DS terminal, the only witnesses to a terrible mistake made by Weyland-Yutani, and there was no way the company was going to let them walk. What was the old saying? Out of the frying pan, into the fire. As soon as the shuttle touched down, Jess stood and walked to the side hatch, talking back over her shoulder. We can't get off, but they didn't say anything about opening the door, did they? Before Lara or Ellis could move, Jess had hit the lock panel, jabbing at the controls determinedly. The thick metal door raised with a hiss, and warm air flooded in. Warm, and an almost overwhelmingly fragrant air. It smelled of soil and vegetation, of warm-sunned life, of jungle rot. It was exquisite, and Lara and Ellis both stood and moved towards the open hatch, Lara feeling a reflexive need to breathe it in. She didn't notice that Jess had frozen, gazing out into the sunny morning with a look of disgust on his unshaven face. "I guess they really don't want us to get off," he said softly. Lara and Ellis stood on either side of him, looking at the 6 men and women standing some 10 meters away, standing near a fuel hatch. Their expressions were grim, their bodies tensed, their hands white-knuckled on the carbine rifles they held, pointed at the open door of the shuttle. At us. The half-dozen guards didn't move, didn't speak. They didn't have to. She and Jess and Ellis were prisoners, and would be until the company decided what was to be done with them. And in that second, realizing that the situation was only going to get worse, an idea that had been gradually forming in Lara's tired mind finally took shape. It was so obvious that she could hardly believe it hadn't already occurred to her. Jess, Ellis, back away from the door slowly. We have to talk. The trader's log had been destroyed, along with the trader, the space station, their ship. But the company didn't know that. If they did, she and the boys would be dead already. And as long as they think that we might have something they want... Slowly, hands raised, the 3 of them moved away from the hatch, away from the light, the hope that Lara had felt at the sight of the beautiful world reborn as the idea solidified, the details falling into place. If they played it right, there was a chance they could walk away after all. Noguchi was in her quarters, sitting on her rumpled bed and lost in thought. The hunt would begin soon, probably as soon as dusk fell over the planet Shell was orbiting. Most of the eggs would have hatched by now, the face-hugging embryo carriers finding incubators, the aliens born in crunches of blood and bone. They were much more active at night, on worlds that had night. Most hunts started when the day star set over the seeded planet. Even now, as the bugs began their violent domination of their new home, the hunters would be arguing over the best sites, working through the rankings for each group of warriors, and planning path direction. Hunts usually started scattered, but almost always ended with all of the groups meeting at a pre-designated site, the better to display their bloody trophies, to count losses, and to step up in caste. The problem was, she didn't know if she could hunt this time. Seeing the human trophy carried by the young leader had shaken her, thrown her off balance in a way that she hadn't expected. How would she be able to find the focus she'd need to hunt? The damage had been done to her respect for the Yautja, which was deep and probably irreparable. She was afraid to leave, to go back to a way of life she didn't really understand. But she couldn't stay either. The only question was, would she hunt this last time? Could she? So heavy was her introspection, the thud at her door made her jump. It had to be Topknot. No one else had ever come to her quarters. Noguchi stood and walked to the door, not sure what she would say to him about her behaviour in the ship dock. He hadn't blooded her, but she was still a hunter on his ship. Her actions could affect his standing among the other leaders. To her surprise, Topknot didn't seem angry when he opened the door. He greeted her instead, his massive claw covering her shoulder, his upper and lower mandibles at rest. The leader motioned her out of the room and toward the main part of the ship, his small eyes shaded in the low light by the thick bowl of his skull. She stepped out into the corridor with him, somehow knowing that what was next as they moved from her room. I've known for some time, haven't I, that it would come down to this. The leader signed as he walked, punctuating the simple gestures with simple words. He raised his hands, extending his claws, touched his bloody mark, a cross shape, tapped his chest and motioned towards hers, clattering the sounds of proverb. Those without honour are not part of the Hunt clan. Those who do not fight for their honour have no honour. Noguchi signalled, fist to brow. I know this. Topknot didn't speak for a moment, giving her time to prepare for the inevitable. She'd had the impression from the beginning that there was no love lost between Broken Tusk and Topknot, but he'd given her a chance, at least. For that, she still respected the leader, even as she felt her anger rise. The first thing she'd learned about hunter culture was that you were only as good as your last fight. In that way, every outlaw was equal, leader and novice alike. When a hunter's courage or honour was in doubt, he had to fight. She waited, again, already knowing. Topknot raised his claws again, gurgling the name of her opponent. Noguchi signalled her understanding. Shorty. She was to fight an unblooded. If she won, her status would remain unchanged. If she lost, if any blooded hunter lost to a novice, I lose my place in the hunt, in all hunts. In time, she'd be given herself a chance to prove herself again, but considering what she'd been thinking and feeling lately, there wasn't going to be a later. Her break with the hunters was imminent. Noguchi turned her face to an invisible sun, tracing her hand in a half circle. When? Hakase, Topknot growled. Now. They were already walking towards the karite, the room where novices learned unarmed and simple blade combat. Noguchi took a deep breath, nodding inwardly, resigned to whatever fate lay ahead. Win or lose, it would be a relief.